Доброго дня, колеги.
Well, good morning, dear colleagues. We're launching UA Erasm. Does it work? Yeah, it's working. Once again. So we're starting the series of briefings that'll be given here at 9:30, at 13:30, Disinformation Counterattack Center at 17:30. Most of the time these briefings will be dedicated to the security situation and attended by Ministry of Defense, Security Service of Ukraine and other agencies. Let me remind you, this project is very urgent insofar as we are targeted by the disinformation warfare. This week we've exposed at least 10 fakes. I, as a former producer, couldn't keep smiling looking at the building that had allegedly been attacked by the Ukrainian artillery, or basically they're working according to the so-called techniques. This is something that we got hold of, and Euler and Russian media are working against these agendas. Look at the removal of Ukrainians to the territory of the Russian Federation, where many of them have to stay in tents. Some of them decided to go back. The numbers, like thousands or dozens of thousands, is made up, but we have to inform the world, the Ukrainians, about the real situation. With this, over to Oleksii Reznikov, Ukrainian Minister of Defense. Thank you, Alexander. Dear media professionals, dear Ukrainians, welcome at the launch of our new media platform that symbolizes unity for Ukraine, for the sake of Ukraine. So in spite of the fact that it's the Russian aggression that made us decide to develop this platform, it's still iconic. When they try to threaten us but we unite and state, the aggressor has no chance. Almost two-thirds of Ukrainians, according to the recent polls, are sure that in case of full-fledged incursion of Russia, will be able to resist. I think no other European nation could be as convinced. The numbers, by the way, grew by 8% since the late January. 72% of Ukrainians have trust in the Ukrainian military, which is the most respected state institution, and we have to keep this spirit because it's one of the things that makes us confident in our victory. The Russian invaded Ukraine back in 2014. We never stopped resisting and became much more powerful. We have amassed experience that no other nation on the continent does have, and I'm sure that later I'll tell you about further achievements of our army and my colleagues about the achievements in economy and culture, and I'm sure that Mr. Leshko will one day come to report that the pandemic is over, pandemics is over. We have had pretty warm and sometimes hot winter time, and this week will require that we all stay vigilant. When I say that our military are ready to rebut any scenarios, this is the case. We don't downplay the threat, but we are trying to select different tactical responses. Well, amongst many other scenarios, we looked at the possibility of Ukraine trying to surround Ukraine from all possible territories, including Transnistria. We also looked at an option of Russia trying to augment their invasion by cyber attacks, trying to subvert the situation. The only goal is to make Ukraine ready for capitulation, for changing our choice, European and Euro-Atlantic, and ultimately give up our independence. And they are trying to implement these scenarios. We are looking at 227 strong land component units and 147 airborne and maritime. We haven't seen any withdrawal or reduction of their strength, because those that have been removed can return very fast. And we know that the Russians and Belarus are not going to go back after having made their march from the Russian Far East. The Russian military are maneuvering very actively in the vicinity of our borders, including the Crimea. There were attempts made to block the Sea of Azov and our ports in Odessa, but they failed. Now, under the pretext of exercise in the Sea of Azov, different vessels, including the rocket launcher, entered the area. In the past days, the occupying forces damaged four schools and other civilian facilities. By the way, don't forget about the monkeys with the grenades, as by damaging the transformers that supply the water pumps, they reduce water supply to the temporarily occupied territories. Those who live there won't be able to get potable water because the pipeline, the water line has been built. So we will certainly repair the station. However, question remains, what quality of water gonna be supplied to the hijacked population of Ukraine? Starting 17th of February, we had 60, 69 and 136 attacks. So last day, the attacks included using the weapons prohibited by Minsk Accords. On 3 occasions, we wanted to convene the meeting of the contact group, including Mikko Kinnunen. And on all 3 occasions, the Russians said no to any new sessions. They are panicking. They're trying to evade open dialogue. The third conference stopped yesterday. Russians, by being so actively passive, tried to get out of the Minsk Accords. Unfortunately, we had 2 fatal casualties. 5 of our military were wounded, whereas for 37 days we didn't have any fatal casualties. Last day they damaged a truck of the Ukrainian groups. Before that, the apes with grenades attacked a humanitarian convoy by UN. So whether it's a cynical plan to sever the territories from the civilized worlds, or it is just idiots working on contract. From the beginning of this day, 14 attacks were registered, including 13 attacks using prohibited weapons. One of our members of the military was wounded. At about 4:15, the aggressors using 152 gauge artillery guns, two Vox 17 attacks were done using their drones. The Russians deploy their artillery next to civilian infrastructure. In 4 days, over 100 civilian buildings were damaged. And it's a war crime. They want to provoke us, and then, under the pretext of defending people who they issued Russian passports, could be protected. But we never let them unpunished. But our military know what to do. The weapons supplied by our partners have already been transferred to our military units. Today, the world sees that the Russians assault kindergartens, civilian infrastructure, generate fakes. The Kremlin isn't any longer believed by anyone, especially after international media professionals were fired at in Luhansk region. Later on, this was urgent evacuation attempt in order to create an image for their propaganda. They actually took hostages of elderly ladies, kids. Now the people try to return back to home. You know, once it was said that the roads and fools are two main problems of our neighbors, but I think that there is another woe. At the same time, the Russian occupation administration announced the wholesale mobilization. People are forced to pick up weapons, otherwise they'll be announced Ukrainian spies. And of course, the number of provocations has grown. Last day, heavy artillery was used to fire shots at Luhansk. Our intelligence sources publicly announced the possible targets where civilian casualties may be expected. I was to be a member of the delegation at the Munich Security Conference alongside President Zelensky, and I had a number of meetings including representatives of different countries. I said thank you to Minister Anand for the shipment of weapons from Canada and the Netherlands. Also followed the suit. Our Polish friends announced to enhance their support. The support is growing. We are actively working towards restocking our reserves and stockpiles. We once again went to those who didn't want to send lethal weapons to us, asking them to help us restock defensive weapons. Currently, we're looking at 3 options. Manufacturing in Ukraine, importation, and aid. Including last Thursday, I was taking part in the conference of Ministers of the Defense NATO Council, at which the security situation was discussed, including possible joint resistance. I'm sure that the support of our partners and the determination of the Ukrainian nation will deter the aggressor. Once again, let me emphasize the Ukrainian army is not planning an offensive. We are for returning our territories and our people by political and diplomatic means, which will happen one day, including Luhansk and Donetsk regions and the Crimea. This week, Russia announced a number of events during which certain decisions might be made, including with regard to Ukraine, and would be keeping our vigil. At the same time, we'll be looking at different proposals of the Parliament, the Cabinet of Ministers. During Friday's hour of questions to the government at the Parliament, I said that the enemy, the adversary, can resort to different types of pressure on us, and we are trying to introduce as many NATO standards to make our weapons. Thank you very much for your attention. Let me remind you, dear colleagues, that starting February 17th, we also registered a new phase of the hybrid warfare. Russia is trying to produce lies and supply them to the world and their population. Russia is trying to announce its rights to Ukraine and post-Soviet territory. We can also see the Russian involvement in the cyber attack on our Ukrainian government sides. The Russian occupying forces fire Ukrainian settlements. They don't stop manipulations, fakes. They show pre-recorded announcements of the occupying forces, trying to make Ukraine look like if it were getting ready for the offensive, which is a lie. The Ministry of Defense, the Office of the President, and others expose those lies. So I call upon you to go to official sources during these days. All these sources are accessible 24/7, and we update the information regularly. Otherwise, we can be taking hostage of the Russian information attacks that try to sow the seeds of panic and fear. We have all the briefings gonna be 30 minutes long, so you have 10 minutes, almost 10 minutes to ask your question, but don't forget to introduce yourself. Ukrinform, Marina Kožuchara. I've got two short questions for the Minister of Defense. In case Putin signs the resolution of Duma recognizing Donetsk and Luhansk territorial occupied territories, would that be the same as legally renouncing that as part of the Russian Federation? How Ukraine would react? You also said that you established a communication with Belarusian Minister of Defense Khrenin, who said that Russian forces gonna be removed after the end of the exercise after February the 20th. Are you planning to talk to your colleagues soon, and if so, what about? Thank you very much. A possible recognition, for instance, tomorrow at Moscow, the terrorist organization as some sort of international units would mean that the Russian Federation decides to directly violate territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Before, even the representatives of the so-called Peter legal school maintain that the temporarily occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk region were Ukrainian territories. So if they decide to recognize those terrorist organizations called republics, they would directly violate the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. And this would create a pretext for the potential of invasion by, for instance, deploying peacekeepers, whatever they call them. That's a clear plan, and I'm sure that the international community that promised to impose sanctions would have a right to do that. Well, recognition does not mean deployment of forces. This will call for another decision. I am reading extensively different experts, including representatives of the media, in which they say that the minister tries to downplay the threat. But look, I am talking to professional military, including Zaluzhny, head of headquarters, Mr. Shaptalar, and commanders of other forces, and I am basing my declarations on the standards of the military science. So while not downplaying the threat, I want to be open. Remember when they announced attack of February 16th, we said no because they were not ready. We didn't have an attack on the 17th, on the 20th, and even today, the 21st, there won't be an attack. Of course, they can augment and start an attack. I'm sure that they have a plan like that, but today the room for maneuver without going to full-fledged war is still here. In order to start an attack, they'll take time, so don't step up the panic. I'm calling to those who pose as the military expect. Do not help the enemy to ruin unity inside of Ukraine. Regarding my communication with Mr. Kharenin, we agreed upon direct interaction. Yesterday, I sent a letter to him using our military attaches requesting a phone call today, during which I think I'll be able to ask direct questions. Yes, officially they announce extension of exercise, so they can go on saying that the Russian troops remain in Belarus because the exercise isn't over. And there's 9,500 Russian military, including equipment, launchers, etc., but there is no contingent that would make it possible to start an attack from Belarus. But it works as a threat that could make us fear. The same reason lies behind the exercise in Transnistria. But let me once again repeat, the military of Ukraine as commanded by military professionals, are ready to resist any scenario. We keep vigil. Good morning, Hryshchuk, Expresso TV. Another question for the Minister of Defense. What's the situation with the evacuees from the Donetsk and Luhansk, and if they decide to come back to Ukraine, is there enough resource in order to help produce fake series? The buses were going back and forth. As a matter of fact, very few people indeed left their homes. Nightclubs kept going. The only thing they did would start the sirens, the loudspeakers. We could even hear them during calls placed by our collocators in Donetsk. However, if citizens of Ukraine decide to leave the temporarily occupied territories, the government is ready to help them. Ms. Vereshchuk, Minister of Temporarily Occupied Territories, is ready. Local administrations are ready. If the checkpoints are blocked, there are other possibilities, say Kharkiv region, we will embrace all of them. Ukraine is not your enemy. Ukraine is waiting for you.
They will apply sanctions.
Будь ласка, не забувайте представитися.
That they will apply sanctions to Russia only and only if they.
Хтось каже, що країни Заходу допоможуть лише в разі справжньої агресії. Well, question was whether it is enough that the civilized nations would impose sanctions after the military invasion. No, we don't think so, and that's exactly what President Zelensky declared at Munich Security Conference. We believe that by the Russian aggression and the statements for the imminent attack, we believe it is time to turn on this sanctions regime. I'd say that even the recognition, possible recognition of the terrorist organizations. However, we know that the sanctions are a threat to Putin, to Russian regime. We even believe that making the list of sanctions public would create a means of deterrence, and would be happy to see this list at least partially made public. This will start changing the situation for the better. Thank you. Let me remind you, we'll take, it was the final question for this time. The briefings like that are going to take place every day at 9:30, 13:30. There'll be briefing dedicated to the exposure of the most recent fakes, and another briefing at 17:30. So the last question, Rada TV, there's information that Putin and Biden agreed to a proposal to meet somewhere in Europe. Do you have any information if President Zelensky is going to be invited to take part in this conference, whether these talks will ever take place? After all, we see a lot of partners talking or even flying to Moscow, but nothing happens. Thank you very much. All meetings or talks, phone talks at Kremlin and between our partners and Putin are taking place after President Zelensky and our Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been informed of, and the same information then is provided after these talks. During Ukrainian delegation stay at Munich at the security conference, President Zelensky, Ukraine actually, insisted that a meeting be held dedicated to European security. So I have this initiative, thanks to Mr. President Macron and President Biden, supported by Prime Minister Johnson, will be implemented, and such consultations are going to take place, including two countries that are in international armed conflict, Russia and Ukraine. But do you know if President Zelensky is is going to meet with President Macron. Look, I am Minister of Defense. Dmytro Kuleba is Minister of Foreign Affairs, so you better ask this question for Mr. Kuleba. Thank you. If I may, I'd like to provide my take on the symbolism that Russians utilize as professional producers. So tension started to mount sometime on February 16th, 17th, exactly when we wanted to mark the Revolution of Dignity and invasion of Crimea. So we have to keep those symbolic dates in mind. Thank you very much. Can I ask you one very short question, Mr. Tkachenko? My friend from Germany told me yesterday that their media is trying to emphasize the militarization of Ukraine, including making our teenagers ready for the invasion. And if this is the case, why are they doing it? We live in a different context than Europeans or Americans. We have been living in the state of war for the past 8 years. So when I explain my foreign colleagues what happened at the contact line, it doesn't seem to be news for them, whilst it is for us. So enhancement of military capabilities at the borders of Ukraine is no news for us, whilst it is for them. And this is exactly why we planned a series of briefings to keep our partners in the know, in the loop, and we think that this constant information will play an important role. By the way, far as I understand, they use information, but they develop their sources. Since indeed, we have been building our territorial defense, 130 plus thousand troops. And we have 70% readiness for peacetime, but we'll be going on to have 150 battalions, 25 brigades throughout all Ukraine in order to help the preparedness of Ukraine. After that, volunteer units will start getting formed using hunters, well, according to the decisions by the territorial defense. Yes, we say that today Ukraine is building itself as a nation capable of full-scale defense. All Ukrainians are ready to defend their territory, and that's where our force is. So Germans should actually try and impose that on their government to let Ukraine get its defensive armaments. Thank you.